Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this comforting expectation of precision, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It is almost like a crude form of engineering. You fall off a ladder, your arm hurts, you go to the hospital, and, they put you in an X-ray machine.
Right.
The film comes up, the doctor points to a jagged white line on the screen and says, there it is. It is binary. It is either broken or it is not broken. It is a clean, visible categorization of what is wrong with you.
We like things to be visible like that, I think.
We really do.
We want tangible evidence that we can point a finger at because it gives us the illusion of control over the problem.
Yeah, but then you step out of the physical realm and into the world of human morality, spiritual condition, and just the sheer weight of our daily actions. And suddenly, that diagnostic X-ray machine is completely shattered.
Yeah, it doesn't work anymore.
Right. We are looking at a landscape of human behavior that is murky and evasive.
Yeah.
We try to self-diagnose our own hearts, and, well, we almost always get the diagnosis entirely wrong, completely wrong. So, welcome to a brand new deep dive on Reformed thinking. Today we are pulling from two striking theological texts. The first is Silencing the Fool's Paradise, and the second is The Ache of Sin.
Two really heavy hitters.
Absolutely. Both of these sources analyze human wickedness, the righteous mercy of God, and the modern therapeutic illusions that just, block humans from understanding grace.
Right.
Our mission for this deep dive is to dig into why understanding our own guilt is the necessary prerequisite to experiencing actual spiritual relief.
And that brings us to a massive contradiction in our current cultural moment. It is something that almost everyone feels, but very few people know how to articulate.
Let me pose this question to you, the listener. Think about the world you interact with every single day. Why does the modern world, which claims to prioritize kindness above all else, feel so much anxiety and pain?
It is everywhere.
It really is. We live in an era obsessed with being nice, with mental health days, with absolute inclusion, yet the background hum of our society is sheer, unrelenting distress. We are the most therapeutically saturated culture in human history, and yet, we are drowning in misery.
Spot on. Well, let me just say, the sources offer a staggering answer to that tension. The central thesis we are working with today is that we have lost the capacity for objective moral shame.
Wow.
Yeah. And in doing so, we have made it impossible to appreciate the radical cure of the gospel. We try to treat a terminal spiritual illness with the equivalent of like a warm cup of tea and a comforting pat on the back.
Which does nothing for a terminal illness.
Right, nothing at all. The texts we are looking at argue that we have to dismantle modern self-esteem culture, and we have to replace it with a rigorous anatomical breakdown of human corruption.
Right.
Only then can we comprehend the massive rescue operation that God executes in the form of double imputation.
This obsession with self-esteem and therapeutic well-being is actually a very new phenomenon, isn't it?
Oh, a very new.
If you dropped a modern person into the ancient Greco-Roman world, they would experience severe culture shock.
Completely.
So how does the modern listener's mindset differ from the mindset of the ancient world when it comes to guilt and divine judgment? Because the first text details a massive historical and cultural shift that changes how we even hear the concept of good news.
To grasp this, we have to look at the daily psychological reality of the Greco-Roman world. When the apostles first went out to preach the Christian faith in the first century, their audience was already saturated with a dread of divine judgment.
Right, they were already scared.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ancient mind lived with an acute, trembling consciousness of sin. If you look at the pagan mystery cults of that era, they were filled with elaborate purgative rituals.
Like what kind of rituals?
Well, people would sacrifice animals, bathe in freezing rivers, and undergo immense physical deprivation.
Wow.
Yeah, and all because they believed they had offended the divine order.
So the background noise of their culture was just this constant, the gods are angry and we are in trouble.
Precisely. They also had the Epicurean philosophical schools. Now, today, we think of an Epicurean as someone who just enjoys fine food and wine.
Right, like a foodie.
Yeah, like a foodie. But in the ancient world, the Epicurean schools existed largely to offer people relief from postmortem anxiety.
Really?
Yeah. The common person was terrified of what would happen to them in the underworld after death. The Epicureans tried to comfort them by teaching that the soul just dissolves into atoms, so there is no judgment to fear.
Ah.
The very fact that this philosophy was so popular proves how terrified the ancient world was of divine retribution.
So when those ancient individuals heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, They recognized it as a cure immediately
Yes, they did.
because they already knew they were sick. The apostolic message did not have to spend decades convincing the audience that they were culpable before the bar of heaven.
Right.
The natural conscience, even though it's, distorted by pagan idolatry,
Mm-hmm.
readily testified to the reality of a looming divine judgment.
Which is an entirely inverted situation compared to what we face today in the modern Western world.
So true.
Our mindset is driven by expressive individualism and a massive therapeutic revolution. Today, secular individuals view themselves as inherently good, stable agents, and what is staggering is how we view God.
Oh, this part is fascinating.
Yeah, if a modern person acknowledges God at all, they treat him as a cosmic debtor.
A cosmic debtor. That phrasing stops you in your tracks.
It really does.
A cosmic debtor who owes humanity a comprehensive explanation for the existence of earthly suffering or physical discomfort.
Right. If something goes wrong, if a person gets a flat tire or loses a job or experiences illness, the modern impulse is to put God on trial.
We demand answers.
We demand to know why he allowed it to happen to such good people. We never stop to ask how a perfectly holy God could tolerate our daily persistent rebellion. The default assumption is that we are the innocent victims and God is the one who has some explaining to do.
Think about it like this. If modern people do not feel they deserve divine wrath, is offering them the cross without first discussing the law, kind of like offering chemotherapy to someone who vehemently denies they have cancer.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Because if a healthy person is offered chemotherapy, they will reject it violently, right? The treatment itself involves suffering, hair loss, and extreme nausea.
Yeah, they would view the doctor as a madman.
Don't they just see the cross as an uncalled-for overreaction if they do not first believe they are spiritually terminal?
They absolutely see it as an overreaction. If you tell a modern person that the Son of God had to be tortured to death on a Roman cross to satisfy divine justice for their sins, their reaction is offense.
They get mad.
Yeah, they think, I am a decent person, I recycle, I smile at my neighbors. Why would such a grotesque, bloody sacrifice be required for someone like me?
Right.
The text references the Apostle Paul in Galatians to explain this dynamic. Paul says the moral law must function as a severe schoolmaster. The Greek term he uses is pedagogos.
Let's unpack that word, pedagogos. Because a modern listener hears schoolmaster and probably thinks of a friendly kindergarten teacher with a sweater and a guitar.
Yeah, that is the complete opposite of the historical reality.
Okay, what was it really like?
In the ancient Greco-Roman world, a pedagogos was not the teacher who taught you math or philosophy. The pedagogos was a strict, often harsh slave employed by a wealthy family. His job was to physically discipline the child, keep the child in line, and forcefully march the child to the actual schoolmaster.
Wow.
If the child stepped out of line, the pedagogos had the authority to use the rod.
So the law has a severe pedagogical use. It does not save us, it beats us up.
Yes.
It exposes our absolute spiritual bankruptcy and forcefully marches us to Christ. It teaches us how sick we actually are so that we will accept the cure.
Yes, and the text brings in Dietrich Bonhoeffer's concept of cheap grace to illustrate what happens when we skip this severe step.
Oh, Bonhoeffer.
Yeah.
He had a lot to say about that.
He really did. It is this idea of preaching forgiveness without requiring repentance, offering communion without requiring confession. The modern seeker-sensitive model attempts to bypass the terrifying thunders of Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
It tries to win people over by appealing to their desires for self-actualization, better finances, or domestic harmony.
Turning the sovereign Lord of hosts into a cosmic life coach.
Precisely.
We just want him to give us 5 tips for a better Monday, rather than falling on our faces before a holy God.
The result is a culture of unregenerate moralists who want the benefits of grace without the crushing realization of their own depravity.
They want the good stuff without the hard truth.
They want the resurrection without the crucifixion. But to understand why people so vehemently reject the diagnostic weight of the moral law, we have to look at what society has substituted for true virtue.
And this connects directly to the modern obsession with being nice.
Yes, it does.
We have systematically collapsed the beautiful, intricate architecture of Christian morality into a single, toothless concept. Sentimentality, or, as society calls it, kindness.
I want to highlight Plato's concept of the unity of virtue here, which the sources mention. Plato argued that you cannot possess courage without temperance, or justice without wisdom.
Okay.
Virtue is an organic whole. You cannot slice it up and pick your favorite parts.
That makes total sense. If you have courage without wisdom, you just have reckless stupidity.
Right.
If you have justice without mercy, you have tyranny. But modern society isolates kindness from holiness and truth. When you sever kindness from objective justice and moral purity, it degenerates.
It really does.
It becomes a mechanism for enabling terrible behavior because you are too cowardly to confront it.
It becomes a complete counterfeit. The text cites Jonathan Edwards, the great American theologian, who analyzed this phenomenon brilliantly. He pointed out that natural benevolence, when it is not rooted in a supreme love for God, is just a refined form of self-love.
Extended self-love. That is such a piercing critique.
It is, isn't it?
People feel kind when they're financially secure, when the temperature in the room is pleasant, and when they're completely unannoyed by their surroundings.
They mistake a fleeting state of emotional happiness for genuine self-sacrificial righteousness. The secular moralist consoles himself for his pride, his greed, his unchastity by clinging to the vague idea that his heart is in the right place.
Or that he wouldn't hurt a fly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, precisely. He thinks he is a good person because he feels warm, fuzzy emotions when he watches a sad movie.
But the moment that person's comfort, safety, or social reputation is threatened, that superficial kindness vanishes.
It is gone in a second.
It instantly evaporates, revealing the latent predatory cruelty that resides within the unregenerate heart. You see this all the time on the road. A person who thinks of themselves as an absolute saint will turn into a screaming maniac if someone cuts them off in traffic and makes them 5 minutes late.
That is terrifying because it means our cultural baseline of niceness is completely conditional. It rests on a fragile foundation of comfort. And because we have elevated this highly domesticated version of kindness to the supreme moral absolute, we have simultaneously launched a psychological war on shame.
Right.
The sources offer a severe critique of psychoanalytic theories that label moral shrinking or a guilty conscience as toxic inhibitions that need to be uprooted.
The modern therapeutic paradigm looks at the instinctual desire to conceal our transgressions, the painful sting of a guilty conscience, and declares those feelings to be diseases.
Yeah, something to be cured.
We are instructed by modern therapists to get things out into the open, but not for the biblical purpose of humble confession and turning away from the flesh. It's about normalizing the transgression so you do not have to feel bad about it anymore.
Right. It is an attempt to eliminate the very capacity for moral embarrassment. The text uses a striking historical analogy here. Think of the ancient Trojans.
Okay, the Trojan horse?
Yeah. They exultantly broke down their own city walls to drag the massive wooden horse into their sanctuary. They were completely unaware that the belly of the horse was filled with armed Greek soldiers waiting to burn their city to the ground.
Wow.
In the same way, modern society celebrates the eradication of moral shame as a triumph of human liberation, but in reality, we are destroying a providential defense mechanism.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second. If you are listening to this and thinking, wait, doesn't modern psychology say hiding flaws is bad?
Yeah.
Let's address that.
Sure.
We hear all the time that repressing our dark desires creates neuroses and that absolute unfiltered transparency is the path to mental well-being. Shouldn't we just be honest about who we are?
The text clarifies this distinction beautifully. The resulting frankness of our shameless age is a very cheap, raw, animalistic frankness. It is the candor of creatures who have sunk far below the capacity for spiritual discernment. True, biblical shame is not a toxic psychological disease. It is the rational, healthy reaction of a fallen creature encountering the objective, blazing light of divine holiness.
So feeling shame when you lie to your boss or gossip about a friend is actually a sign that your conscience is still somewhat functional.
Yes.
To remove the temptation to hypocrisy by simply normalizing depravity is a catastrophic form of moral hygiene. It is like curing a fever by killing the patient.
That is a great way to put it.
The harrowing perception of our own ugliness that we experience in moments of genuine, crushing shame is the only accurate evaluation of our standing apart from saving grace.
And if we actively suppress this healthy shame, the human mind does not just stop feeling guilty. The conscience is still there, ticking away.
It doesn't just turn off.
Right. So the mind creates elaborate, sophisticated defense mechanisms to dodge personal guilt. The text outlines the architecture of carnal self-deception by identifying 4 specific evasions.
Let's dig into those.
These are the tricks we play on ourselves every single day to avoid looking in the mirror.
I think we all do this, right? Let's walk through these 4 evasions in detail. The first is what the text calls the Pharisaical fallacy of exteriority.
This is the habit of judging our spiritual condition by comparing our manicured public personas with the visible, scandalous failures of others.
Ah, yes.
We look at the explicitly wicked, the criminal, the social outcast, the person whose life has completely fallen apart in public, and we quietly congratulate ourselves on our superior moral standing.
We think, well, I might have a temper, but at least I didn't embezzle $1 million like that guy in the news.
Exactly.
We ignore the reality of our own internal state. The text references John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, where he observes that the human mind is a perpetual factory of idols and a hidden labyrinth of deceit.
The hidden labyrinth. That is such a vivid image.
It really is.
In the span of a single second, while you are sitting in a church pew or walking down the grocery aisle, thoughts of intense malice, unchaste desires, and venomous pride flash across your mind.
Just constantly.
Yeah. You entertain fantasies of revenge against someone who slighted you. You covet what your neighbor possesses. We ignore all of that internal roiling corruption while feeling perfectly superior to someone who committed a public crime.
But if pointing at criminals does not work to soothe the conscience, we usually find a way to hide behind a crowd. We blame the system. And that brings us to the second evasion, the corporate guilt aversion.
Oh, this one is everywhere right now.
Incredibly fashionable today. Modern people project all moral culpability onto abstract systems or historical institutions.
The text is careful to note that corporate guilt is a valid biblical category. Nations and institutions can commit systemic evil, and the prophets in the Old Testament routinely indicted entire nations for their collective rebellion.
Sure.
But the unregenerate heart uses corporate guilt as a cost-free shield to protect the ego.
A cost-free shield. What does that look like in practice for the average person scrolling on their phone?
Well, it costs a person absolutely nothing to rage against the injustice of a massive social system on the internet. You can type out a furious post condemning historical failures, decrying capitalism, or attacking a political party, and it demands zero personal mortification.
Just a few taps on a screen.
Right. It provides a massive dopamine hit of self-righteousness. But it costs everything to repent of practicing deceit in your own business affairs. It costs everything to humble yourself and apologize for harboring bitter, unremitting malice toward your spouse.
Wow.
The heart eagerly focuses on structural issues miles away to distract attention from its own mundane, old-fashioned personal sins right at home.
So we substitute cheap political outrage for costly personal repentance. We feel like we are fighting for justice, but we are really just avoiding the terrifying work of dealing with our own specific daily transgressions.
Yes, exactly.
Then we move to the third evasion, the temporal illusion of absolution. This is the irrational belief that the sheer passage of time neutralizes past sins.
We recount the cruelties of our youth with detached amusement like it was a different person. Oh, I was just a crazy kid back then.
Like time just washes it away.
We assume that because a decade has passed, the sin has somehow evaporated into the ether.
This is where the text brings in a staggering concept regarding the multidimensional nature of God. Because God exists outside of time, he does not experience chronology the way we do.
Right.
We experience time like a single dot moving along a line drawn on a piece of paper, but God is hovering above the paper looking at the entire line all at once.
For an omniscient, eternal God, all points in time are simultaneously and perpetually present. So our past actions are trapped in an eternal now.
Oh, that is heavy.
Along some dimension of eternity, the schoolboy is forever pulling the wings off a fly. The young man is forever committing secret impurities in his dorm room. The mature adult is forever practicing deceit to close a business deal.
That is a terrifying thought, that the things we think faded away 20 years ago are currently actively happening before the eyes of a holy God.
Yeah.
Chronological distance possesses zero power to cleanse a moral stain. The passage of time does not absolve anyone, it just makes us forgetful. Only the blood of a substitute can cleanse the eternal record.
Which leads us to the fourth evasion. The fallacy of democratic normalcy. This is the grading curve mentality. Safety in numbers.
Oh, I hear this one constantly.
We assume that if the human condition is universally corrupted, then our personal badness must be highly excusable.
We treat collective rebellion as a grading curve where God will adjust his standards to accommodate our weakness. We say nobody is perfect, or everyone tells a white lie now and then.
Right.
We think God grades on a curve, and as long as we're sitting comfortably in the middle of the bell curve of humanity, we will pass the final exam.
The text uses a military analogy here. It describes humanity as an isolated pocket of evil. Imagine a mutinous, poorly disciplined military regiment stationed on a remote island.
Okay, picture that.
They have completely abandoned the general's orders. Their uniforms are a mess. They sleep in until noon and they steal from each other. They might set their own internal standards and think they're doing fine because they are all behaving the exact same way.
But the holy cosmos judges by an absolute standard, not the local regiment's compromise curve.
Spot on.
When the general finally arrives on the island to inspect the troops, he does not care that they all agreed to lower the standards. If everyone is lying, it just means the whole regiment is guilty of treason, not that lying is suddenly acceptable behavior.
These four evasions, exteriority, corporate diversion, temporal illusion, and democratic normalcy, they are the defense attorney's arguments. They are the tricks we use to plead not guilty.
Right.
But the Apostle Paul strips every single one of them away in his letter to the Romans. He acts as the divine prosecutor, cornering the entire human race in a courtroom and laying out the objective forensic evidence that dismantles our illusions.
Let's set the scene for that courtroom in Romans 3. To understand the anatomy of depravity, we have to grasp the historical setting of first-century Rome. Rome projected massive order.
Very impressive order.
They had paved roads connecting the known world, sophisticated legal codes, unbelievable marble architecture, and administrative genius. Yet, underneath that shining veneer of civilization, the city harbored extreme political violence, sexual disorder, brutal social stratification, and the worship of pure power.
The gospel did not enter a neutral, polite world. It entered a society where men could praise virtue in the public square while practicing severe corruption and cruelty in private. And within the Roman Church itself, there was intense tension between the Jewish believers and the Gentile believers.
The Jews had the oracles of God, the moral law, the covenants, the history of the prophets, and they tended to boast in that historical superiority.
Yeah, they felt they had the upper hand.
The Gentiles were emerging from chaotic paganism and looked down on the Jewish legalistic scruples regarding food and holy days.
Paul writes to this fractured, prideful congregation and executes a progressive legal trap. In Romans 1, he indicts the pagan Gentiles for suppressing natural revelation through idolatry.
Right.
He shows how they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Then in Romans 2, he pivots and indicts the moralist, the person who judges the obvious sinners of Romans 1 while practicing subtler sins in their own heart.
He traps the moralists with their own judgmental attitude, and then in the rest of Romans 2 and early 3, he indicts the religious Jew for boasting in the law while simultaneously breaking it.
He systematically removes every single hiding place.
Yeah, no one is safe.
The pagan cannot hide behind ignorance, the moralist cannot hide behind their comparative goodness, and the religious person cannot hide behind their rituals.
And then in Romans 3.9, he draws the net completely tight.
Yeah.
All are under sin, Jews and Greeks alike.
Right.
He issues a universal verdict. And to prove it, he provides an anatomical breakdown of sin using a chain of Old Testament quotes from the Psalms and Isaiah.
This is where the concept of human wickedness ceases to be an abstract theological theory and becomes fiercely physical. Paul targets specific body parts to demonstrate that radical corruption has touched every faculty.
It is so descriptive.
He starts with the throat, tongue, lips, and mouth. Their throat is an open grave. They use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness.
Think about why he focuses so heavily on the mouth. The speech we produce is just the toxic overflow of the heart's furnace. James tells us the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness.
Yeah.
We use our lips to flatter people to their faces and then destroy their reputations behind their backs. We use our mouths to spread venom that ruins relationships and tears apart families. The open grave imagery means that our words actually produce this stench of death.
Then he moves to the feet and eyes. Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery. We do not just stumble into sin. Our feet actively run toward malice and selfishness. We eagerly pursue the things that destroy ourselves and others, and he identifies the root cause of all of this bodily decay. There is no fear of God before their eyes.
Where reverent awe disappears, sin becomes thinkable. Once it is thinkable, it becomes speakable. Then it becomes normal. And finally, it is celebrated.
That is the progression.
The lack of the fear of God is the fountainhead of all human misery.
After laying out this anatomical map of corruption, Paul delivers the legal verdict. The text dives into the original Greek words here, which carry so much weight. The purpose of the lie is so that every mouth may be stopped. The Greek word is phrag.
Frege. Let's break that down.
Frege means to be violently gagged or fenced in. Picture a defendant in a courtroom who keeps trying to interrupt the judge with excuses.
But Your Honor, I had a tough childhood.
But, Your Honor, everyone else was doing it. When the holy law of God speaks, human self-justification, all those therapeutic excuses, the grading curve, the corporate diversions, they are not answered or debated politely. They are forcibly gagged by the overwhelming weight of the evidence.
The defendant is left completely speechless. And the second word Paul uses describes our resulting status, hypotikos.
In extra-biblical classical Greek and Athenian legal papyri, hypotikos denotes a completely condemned debtor or a criminal who has totally lost his case.
So it is over.
The trial is over, the appeals have run out, he stands entirely condemned and has absolutely no legal defense left to offer. The whole world is legally bankrupt before God.
This devastating anatomical breakdown of sin where the mouth is violently gagged and the sinner is left bankrupt brings up a massive theological concept. And it is one that is often misunderstood, even by brilliant Christian thinkers like C.S. Lewis.
Lewis struggled with the historic Reformed doctrine of total depravity. He argued that if humans were totally depraved, they would lack the capacity to even recognize their own depravity.
His logic makes sense on the surface.
It does. His logic was that if your mind is completely broken, you cannot accurately diagnose the break, just like a broken ruler cannot measure a straight line.
It is a smart objection, but the sources provide a confessional correction to this, drawing on the Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 6. Lewis confused total depravity with absolute depravity.
That distinction changes everything. Absolute depravity would mean that every human being is as outwardly wicked as they could possibly be.
Like the worst possible version of themselves.
Yeah, that every person is a murderer, a thief, completely devoid of any civic virtue. It would mean society could not even function because everyone would be at each other's throats constantly.
Which is obviously not true. We see non-Christians doing civic good, loving their children, building hospitals, and writing beautiful music. So how can we say they are totally depraved?
Because of common grace. God graciously restrains the full expression of human wickedness so that the world can function. What total depravity actually means is that radical corruption has touched every single faculty of the human constitution.
The intellect, the will, the affections, and the conscience.
Right. It is systemic. Think of a glass of pure water. If you put one drop of deadly poison into it, the water is not absolutely poison.
It still looks like water.
It is still mostly water, but it is totally poisoned because the poison has touched every single molecule in the glass.
That is the perfect way to understand it. Humans still retain the sensus divinitatis, the natural sense of the divine, and a functioning conscience, which allows them to feel guilt and recognize the moral law.
They can recognize the moral law, and they can feel the sting of shame, but spiritually they are dead.
Right.
They are completely unable to execute any spiritual good that would satisfy the perfect demands of God, and they are utterly unable to incline themselves toward Him apart from saving grace. Their will is bound by their corrupt nature.
Once we understand that radical systemic corruption, we have to confront the necessity of divine wrath. The text makes a striking claim. A God without wrath against cruelty and deceit would be a moral monster.
Wow, yeah.
We often think of wrath as a negative attribute, something we have to apologize for.
Think about the things Paul listed. Deceit, venom, bloodshed, misery. Divine wrath is not a petulant emotional outburst of anger from a frustrated deity who did not get his way.
Right, it's not a temper tantrum.
No, it is the pure, holy reaction of absolute light encountering absolute darkness. If God did not burn with a holy, unappeasable distaste against malice, pride, and the abuse of the vulnerable, He would not be a good being.
To wish for a God incapable of holy wrath is like wishing that the sense of smell were eradicated just because our own breath happens to be foul.
That is a great comparison.
We want God to lower His standards so we can feel comfortable. But a good judge must punish evil. That brings up a fascinating paradox regarding sanctification. The texts point out that the holiest individuals in history possess the most scientifically accurate awareness of their own deep-seated corruption.
This is why the Apostle Paul, near the end of his life and ministry, after planting churches and writing half the New Testament, referred to himself as the chief of sinners.
He wasn't just being humble for the sake of it.
No, when the great saints wept over their remaining indwelling sin, they were not indulging in manipulative self-deprecation or pious illusions to look humble.
They were just recording spiritual reality with absolute precision. The closer a soul gets to the blinding, immaculate light of God's holiness, the more clearly it sees the dark corners of its own remaining corruption.
Exactly.
If you clean a room in dim lighting, it looks spotless. But if you open the blinds and let the bright morning sun stream in, you suddenly see all the dust floating in the air.
But let me ask you, if you are constantly staring at your own bankruptcy and seeing all that dust in the air, doesn't this intense, microscopic self-awareness just lead to morbid, paralyzing gloom?
That is the logical question, right?
How do you get out of bed in the morning if you know you are a totally depraved, totally bankrupt debtor?
The text addresses this beautifully. It actually produces the exact opposite of gloom. It produces a cheerful, lighthearted virtue, a cheerful humility.
Because it completely frees you from the exhausting, impossible task of maintaining a pristine self-image.
Oh, that sounds so freeing.
The high-minded secular moralist is trapped in profound sadness because they have to constantly ignore the brutal realities of human history and the shabbiness of their own heart to defend the generic goodness of human nature.
It is a full-time job.
They have to act as their own PR department, constantly spinning their failures to look like successes.
The believer, having faced the absolute worst about themselves, can look at their bankruptcy and laugh with holy joy because their standing rests entirely on someone else. They do not have to prop up the illusion of their own righteousness anymore. The worst thing about you is already known by God, and yet you are loved.
We have spent all this time on the severe diagnosis, the violently gagged mouth, the terrifying thunders of the law. Once the pride is crushed, how does the divine courtroom operate to save the condemned debtor?
The rule established in the text is Sinai before Zion. You cannot bypass the lightning-girt peaks of Mount Sinai. The moral law requires perfect perpetual obedience.
Right.
You cannot transcend the claims of the law by ignoring them. You have to face your absolute failure. And the solution is the pristine Reformed doctrine of double imputation.
The text breaks down this mechanism of salvation by contrasting it with two other systems: Roman Catholic infused justification and Arminian synergistic schemes.
Let's define those briefly.
In infused justification, the idea is that God makes the sinner inherently righteous over time. He pours grace into them like medicine into a sick patient, so they can slowly merit their final salvation through their own good works, cooperating with that grace.
And what about the synergistic view?
Synergistic schemes suggest we cooperate with God, offering our imperfect obedience, which He graciously accepts as sufficient. It is a group project where God does most of the work, but we still have to chip in our percentage.
Right.
Double imputation rejects both of those ideas completely. In justification, our standing is secured legally in a courtroom by a divine substitute.
There are two halves to this imputation. The first is Christ's passive obedience. This refers to Him voluntarily taking the unmitigated cup of divine wrath on the tree. He acts as the propitiation. The Greek word is hilasterion, for our radical wickedness.
He bears the exact penalty that the violently gagged debtor deserves.
So if we use a banking analogy, passive obedience is like having a massive trillion-dollar debt that you could never pay off in a million lifetimes. Christ steps in and pays the debt down to zero. Your account is cleared.
Yeah, completely wiped out.
But a cleared account just leaves you neutral. It leaves you at zero, and zero does not get you into heaven. The law requires a positive record of perfect righteousness.
That is where His active obedience comes in. Christ did not just die to wipe the slate clean. Over His entire earthly life, He perfectly fulfilled every single detail, every jot and tittle of the moral law.
He lived the life we couldn't.
He loved God with all His heart, soul, mind, and strength every single second of His life. He generated a spotless, positive righteousness.
And that pristine record of obedience is legally credited or imputed to the believer through faith alone. So Christ takes our trillion-dollar debt and He deposits His infinite wealth into our account.
It is a massive exchange.
When God looks at the believer, He does not see a cleared-out, empty account. He sees the perfect righteousness of His own Son.
This is how God remains just, while also being the justifier of the one who has faith. He does not sweep sin under the rug. He punishes it fully in the substitute, and He rewards perfect law-keeping, which was achieved by that same substitute.
If we connect this back to the initial hook of the episode, the problem of pain, the world looks at suffering and asks, why does a good God allow pain? The cross answers that question by showing that God Himself enters human history, suffers at the hands of wicked men, and absorbs the penalty of sin.
The cross is simultaneously the greatest human crime, the murder of the incarnate Son of God, and the greatest divine mercy.
Amazing.
Pain does not disprove God's goodness. The cross demonstrates that God can ordain the darkest wickedness and bring forth salvation from it.
Think about the imagery we used earlier. The condemned sinner, hypotikos, stands before the judge with his mouth violently gagged by his own undeniable guilt. Christ voluntarily places himself under the law. And what does he do? He keeps his own mouth silent.
Like a sheep before its shearers is silent.
He utters no defense so that the guilty, gagged sinner can be declared perfectly righteous.
It is a staggering exchange. The innocent one stays silent so the guilty one can sing. And this theological framework does not just stay in the courtroom. It completely rewrites how you should live, how you speak, and how you process suffering on a daily practical basis.
Let's summarize the key takeaways from our deep dive today. We started by seeing how the therapeutic illusions of our modern culture trick us into thinking we are basically good, treating God as a cosmic debtor who owes us a comfortable life.
Then we saw how the moral law acts as an X-ray, exposing the anatomical depth of our corruption, bypassing our sophisticated evasions and gagging our excuses. We cannot hide behind corporate guilt, the passage of time, or the grading curve.
And only by accepting this total spiritual bankruptcy can we joyfully receive the active and passive obedience of Jesus Christ. Based on these texts, we can draw out 4 specific practical applications for you to take into your life right now.
The first is to stop minimizing sin. Drop the padded excuses.
We really need to do this.
We need to stop saying things like, well, I meant well, or I was under pressure, or at least I'm kind. We have to concede that our hidden thought life, left to itself, is a horror. We need honest confession before a holy judge, with specific sins named and no refuge taken in vague regret.
Application number 2. Recover the fear of God. A casual therapeutic view of God leads directly to a casual view of sin. When God is treated as a mascot for our personal dreams, sin becomes manageable.
So true.
We need to cultivate reverent awe, recognizing that we are dealing with a consuming fire who is also a merciful Father.
Application number 3. Repent of sins of speech. Remember the anatomical breakdown from Romans 3. Your throat, your tongue, your lips. Many people would never commit physical violence, but they will shed reputations through gossip.
They will ruin people.
They will poison homes through sarcasm and passive-aggressive comments. Speech is the overflow of the heart. If your speech is toxic, it is because your heart needs the gospel.
And the 4th application. Do not excuse bitterness and suffering. Even when you are a legitimate victim of the wickedness of others, that pain does not give you a free pass for revenge, for slander, or for self-pity.
Right.
The cross gives sufferers a refuge because Christ bore sin, but it also gives a pattern of entrusting oneself to the judge who rules justly.
It demands that we measure wickedness by the blood required to atone for it, and measure grace by the Son freely given. You cannot hold on to bitterness when you realize how much you have been forgiven.
To close out our deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, building on that concept of time we discussed earlier. If God exists outside of time, and past sins are an eternal now before him, unless they are covered by Christ's blood, what does this mean for the concept of memory in eternity?
That is a wild thought.
When we are glorified, will our own perception of time eventually align with God's? Imagine seeing the full, terrifying scope of our past reality, the rebellion, the deceit, the hidden labyrinth of our minds, running concurrently with the overwhelming, constant reality of our complete justification. It suggests a vision of heaven, where the contrast between our complete unworthiness and God's immense grace does not fade into the background. It is not an amnesia where we forget we were sinners. It remains a perpetual, visible, and joyous revelation. A constant state of cheerful humility before the throne, forever amazed that the gagged debtor was given the righteousness of the Son.
Amen to that.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive on Reformed thinking.